So if you're relatively new to knitting, or if you're just a little bit confused as to what a chart is, I'm going to show you how to read them and what exactly they do. A chart is basically a visual representation of knitted stitches. Now, any pattern can be written down in longhand, so you say knit two together, SSK, yarn over, things like that. And that's pretty much how knitting was written for who knows how long, since it was written down pretty much, either in longhand or in the familiar abbreviations K2 TOG, SSK, YO, things like that. But then charting came along. And basically what a chart is it's a stitch-by-stitch representation of exactly what you're going to be knitting. So every single box on a chart represents one stitch. Now when I say one stitch, sometimes that one stitch is one motion that involves many stitches, such as the SSK, which is actually over 2 stitches, and the yarn over, which creates a new stitch. But overall, when you see a chart, you see a representation of exactly what you're going to be doing. So how do you read one? Well, it's actually a fairly simple process. What you have to get used to before you really start knitting is similar to when you started knitting and maybe you started reading patterns and it looked like a completely different language. In this case, it's like a pictographic version of that completely different language. So you'll have to get used to the fact that a slash going in one direction is a knit two together, a slash going in the other direction is an SSK, and so on. So you'll want to familiarize yourself with the legend of any chart before you begin to knit. Now this is just a couple examples of what you might see on a legend. There's many, many more here, and I'll be going over those in just a little bit. So charts were pretty much pioneered by Barbara Walker, and though we don't carry these books, unfortunately, they are a really good example of the difference between charts and written text. So on this page here, you see a humongous block of text. And this is all describing what's called a Baroque cable over a panel of 42 stitches. It's 42 rows, each written out individually. And here's the chart for that very same cable. As you can see, it takes up a little bit less space than the typing. So charts are definitely a space-saving mechanism. And it's very easily seen what you're doing. So when you see something like row 36 here, P4, K3, 1BC, P3, 2FC, that can kind of get a little bit tedious. And if you, like me, have trouble reading all those things in order and tend to get them backwards, it can be doubly so. But when you look on this chart at row 36, you can see, okay, well when I get to this point, that must be knit. When I get to this point, that must be purl. Okay, I see what I'm doing. So it's a way to sort of check yourself against where you've knit, what you've already done, and see where you are, see where you're going, and have a really good idea of exactly what that 3FC actually means. You see right here, this is where those stitches are going. In this case, it's a cable. And you can see that, okay, the cross is in this direction, and it's going to be 3 stitches over 3 stitches. So a chart is basically a way to take all of those written clues and turn them into a picture. Now another thing that a chart has that a written piece of patterning might not is a regular repeat. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of cases where you're going to be doing the same pattern several times over a number of stitches. Now if something is written out, that repeat might actually change depending on what row you're on. So you may have a repeat that starts with the first knit 2 together, and say you have a series of knit 2 together, double yarn over, SSK, K1. And then the next row, because you've got something else going on, you're going in the other direction, the repeat will actually start on the other side of the row in some other place. But in the case of charts, because it is visual, you can't have repeats starting in different places. So anytime you have a repeat, it's going to be noted by a box. Every row will have a repeat in the exact same place. And because of that, it's really easy to see that, okay, the only thing that doesn't fall into that repeat is off to the side. So when I'm knitting, I just knit across. Okay, I get to here, and I know that everything within this box, I'm just going to go one side to the other, one side to the other, one side to the other. In this case, 16 stitches, and you repeat that 13 times. As soon as that's over, you move on to the rest of the row. And then on the row back, let's say if you're knitting flat, you pretty much do the same thing. You would work until you get to that line where the repeat begins, and then you know that's the repeat. There's no brackets, there's no asterisks. That's the part that you do over and over again until you move on to the end of the chart. So repeats are definitely very recognizable in a chart. It's a very graphical format, and it's the kind of thing where it's very easy to see exactly where a repeat joins with the rest of the pattern. And because of that, it's easy to see, in this case, this is a lace shawl edging, and it's changing in size. It's actually decreasing along the sides here. These are mitered corners, and you can see that this piece can sort of live independently from the repeat because it's charted. So you don't have to worry about writing out all of the details and having it get slowly smaller, and at the end of that row write 53 stitches remaining, 51 stitches remaining, 49 stitches remaining. It's obvious when you actually get to that row in the chart how many stitches you should have. So when you start reading charts, you start to familiarize yourself with the legend, one of the things you're going to notice is that sometimes charts go two ways. And because when a pattern is written, it's written exactly as you're working it. In a chart, it doesn't exactly work that way if you're knitting both directions. So that means right side and wrong side. So you'll see on your chart, in most cases, the direction that you're going to be knitting on that particular row, the row number will exist on the side where you start knitting. So this is actually just feather and fan. This is a really easy one, and I do recommend if you're new to reading charts, find a chart like this, so like feather and fan, something that you're familiar with already, even if it's a color chart or something like that. If it's something that you've seen before, you've worked before, something that's recognizable to you. So you can see how that same stitch that you're used to working translates into a chart. So in this case, this is the instructions for the feather and fan, which is row 1 knit, row 2 purl. Now, it's kind of odd. It looks exactly identical, even though you're actually knitting across this row and then purling back across this row. The reason is because a chart is always written from the right side. So what you see in a chart is what the right side will look like. And that's going to be noted in the legend. In this case, you see that this clear box here, this open box, on the right side, that's a knit stitch. On the wrong side, that's a purl stitch. So you have to keep in mind both that this is representing a stockinette stitch, that when you're working, in this case, the right side, it's knit, wrong side, it's purl, because on the right side, that purl stitch will look like a knit stitch. And since charts are written from the right side, on the chart, it looks like a knit stitch. Same goes for the purls. This is actually a row of knit stitches, but on the front, it forms that little ridge in the feather and fan that kind of looks like one little ridge of garter stitch. So another thing you'll see here, this is one repeat of the feather and fan pattern, and on row 3, you have knit 2 together 3 times, and then in parentheses, YOK1 6 times, so yarn over knit 1 6 times. And then you knit 2 together 3 times, repeat from the start to end. In this case, it's these 18 stitches of the chart. You can see clearly, here you have your 3 knit 2 togethers, yarn over K1, yarn over K1, you repeat that 6 times, knit 3 together, knit 2 together 3 times, and then you go right from stitch 18 to stitch 1 as many times as you wanted to repeat across your piece. So you can see how each row of written text translates exactly to what you see here. Now, feather and fan is a very simple pattern. It's a very easy repeat. So again, I do recommend if you're new to charts, try something like this, because it's going to be something that, you know, it doesn't take you too many rows to get the hang of it. It's only 4-row repeat. It's a very easily memorized pattern, and it's something where you can get used to the stitches and you can get used to certain things. Now, another note about the symbols. Where possible, a symbol is actually meant to mimic what the stitch is going to look like. So a yarn over is an O, because eventually, you know, when you are past that row, it's like a little hole when you're knitting. A knit two together is actually going to, the line of the knit two together is going to mimic the direction of that decrease in the finished knitting. So SSK is slant one way, knit two together is slant the other way. Central double decreases are like a little V with a line down the middle because they're perfectly centered. So basically you're going to have sort of like a little code, and when you see a line you think, okay, well my decrease is leaning in this direction, that means it must be a knit two together. You'll always have a legend to refer to, so you know, after a while you won't have to even think about it, and it actually gets a lot simpler. Now, it goes much farther than knit two together in Yarn O. This is basically what you encounter in a lace pattern. Lace patterns are some of the most difficult charts to follow because they are so complex in many cases. And this, again, this is the border of a knitted shawl. This is actually from the Baltic Lace Kit. And there's noops in here, there's purl 5 together, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And here's that central double decrease that I was just talking about. So it's a little V. And what else you'll notice here is this funny black spot. This is called no stitch. What this is something that does not exist in real life. And that sounds strange, but it's abstract. It basically represents something that's been removed. Or in this case, it looks like something that's increased into. So when you look across the row and you see, okay, well this chart takes place over 52 stitches, there are not 52 stitches on the needle on the first row. There's 52 minus all of these little black squares, because they're not there yet. They're going to be added in as you move up. So when you see a no stitch, basically what that is something that exists only in charts to allow the different stitches of the chart to match up with each other where they're going to be in the final knitted piece. So as you see here, you can actually see the pattern of this edging as it will finally look. And you know, okay, well I have a noop here, and 2 rows above that there's going to be a yarn over. Okay, so when I get to that point, if I'm doing that yarn over, it had better be 2 rows exactly over a noop that I put there. And same thing right here, all of your decreases are going to line up. So I know when I get to this particular decrease, it's going to line up directly over the one 2 rows below it. And if there were no stitch placeholders in there, like as we see, this is a pretty difficult little chart here. This is actually for a Honeybee Stitch, which requires all kinds of goofy things to happen. And because this is such a funny looking stitch, like when it's actually written out, it's kind of hard to follow, so charting works. But if you took all of those no stitches out, you'd end up with this, which is pretty much impossible to read. Doesn't look at all like the finished item. But if you were to translate the written out directions exactly to chart without putting those no stitches in there, this is what it would look like. So as you can see, if you compare the two, those no stitch placeholders really exist to line up all your stitches so you get a really good graphic representation of what you're actually knitting. So again, we have all sorts of different symbols here. Now, for the most part, most people use the same symbols for the basic instructional pieces, knit together, yarn over. And then in some cases, each designer will kind of come up with their own system of describing things that are maybe a little bit weird. In this case, there's actually drop yarn overs, and that exists over here, where in the Honeybee Stitch, you have several yarn overs, and all of a sudden you drop all of them off the needle to create these sort of large open wings of the honeybee. And so that is noted right here, and it gives you specific directions that when you see this funny little triangle, you're supposed to do this particular thing. So you'll probably want to refer to the legend before you begin any new chart, just to see if there's anything a little different or something unexpected. So in general, when you're reading a chart, if you're reading a right side row, you basically are going to be reading from right to left, and that's going in the direction that you're actually knitting the stitches. So you see here we have an SSK, and then a yarn over, then an SSK, then a yarn over, then an SSK, and a knit one. And so it goes in that order across. In this case, this is a chart that's knit in the round, so all the rows line up on this side. This chart is knit flat, so you have right side, wrong side, and the wrong side rows are read from left to right, so they go in the other direction. And remember, you're reading it backwards and upside down, essentially, when you look at this versus what you're actually doing. Now, to keep your place, because some charts are pretty extensive, like this one, I mean, this border chart is actually pretty tame compared to some that you might encounter. We have this lovely little device called Chart Keeper, and this is something that you can use this. You can also use the same kind of idea. It's basically a little magnetic board. It has a strap on it here, and you just sort of clip the strap into place. You set it up like a little easel, and then you can pin your chart to it using the provided magnets, or cute little fridge magnets if you want. And you just sort of pin your pattern right in on there. And that gets it out of your hands. You don't have to worry about it. I'm actually going to pin this on upside down because the chart's up here. Just so you get an idea. As you're going along your chart, you can cover over whatever row you've just finished and just keep moving that magnet up as you complete a row. So that keeps your place really, really well, especially if it's a chart you're going to be using several times. Say it's a pattern stitch that you're working over and over and over in the body of a sweater, sleeves, or you're going to have to use it here and then use it in another patch on a baby blanket, something like that. And you don't want to sit there and scribble out the pattern. This is a really great way to keep your place. Now, another great way that you can keep your place as well, there's removable tape. That's like brightly colored highlighter tape, and you can get that in a lot of that, you can get it in the school supply section of office stores and things like that. And you can, if it is a chart you're going to use once, like in this case, this is the lace border chart. If you're doing this, once you go around, you're done with that row, and so you just cross it on out and then move on to the next row, and you can keep your place that way. So keeping your place is really important, but unlike written text, a line of a chart will never go to the next line. And so that can be really, really beneficial if you're dyslexic, or if you just have a little bit of a problem following one line to the other, because things start to look all the same after a while. I have that problem, which is why I started using charts. So overall, chart reading is incredibly easy. It's very useful in the cases of color work, Fair Isle, Intarsia, things like that. You're always going to encounter a chart. It's much easier to represent all of those colors visually than it is to represent them with text. I mean, when you think about a pixelated image, each one of those pixels is like the square on a charted piece of knitting. Now, you could write out that same picture in binary, which is, how a satellite would send a picture. It's all in binary, and then we're left to kind of pick out the pieces and figure out how it's all put together. But instead of doing that, having all of those little squares lined up for you, ready to go, gives you a perfect roadmap of where your piece is going to start and where it's going to end. So that's a basic primer on how to read a chart, why you'd want to read a chart, what it's good for, and the fact that once you get used to it, you probably won't go back to reading written directions, because reading a chart is so easy. It's easy to check your work. You know where you are. You can see where you left off. And it's something you can use again and again and again without worrying about, oops, I missed a row. So there you have it. That's how to read a chart.